Okay, so we just talked to Landon about a lot of the great functionality in Citrix Analytics and Citrix content collaboration for things like monitoring access, security, and protecting content. Now we want to do shift gears and do a deep dive on Web and Sas.
Yeah, and I think for the past couple of years, we have seen this explosion of web and SaaS applications where, just every time, every customer, no matter what industry, it's just they have so many SaaS and web application, which obviously has a ton of benefits, but it also opens the possibility for attackers. So I guess the $1 million question is there a way to secure the internet while also giving the users a usable experience, right? So for that, we have invited Michael to talk to us about how we can secure SaaS and web applications. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much.
So Michael, why don't you tell us? I'm sure you see it all the time in the field. You've seen that trend of SaaS and web applications just, exploding.
hmm
So what are our customers doing, or what can they do to protect SaaS and web applications and still give the user something that is usable and good?
Sure, absolutely. So, I mean, this all comes down to the fact that we kind of, since IT has changed, there really has been a big paradigm shift from kind of how we secure stuff and how IT looked in the past, because you used to kind of course, own your own environment. You used to hold all the keys to the fortress, and everything the users actually needed resided within that fortress. But has changed since, and since we now are consuming SaaS-based apps from all different locations. Web apps no longer only resides within some data center that you own. It's probably a hybrid environment between different clouds and so on. The kind of considerations you have to think about when it comes to security on Web and SaaS has also changed, of course. So it really requires a multi-layered approach to kind of have some sort of security, right? And to gain that security that you kind of used to have in the past by default or by architecture, so to speak. So the question kind of, if we try to break this problem down, it kind of evolves around how are we going to provide access to these web and SaaS apps while still minimize the risks, right? Because of course there's no such thing as 100% secure. But if we kind of try to break down into the more common components of this question, to our customers, it's usually issues around the multitude of different client types that a customer might have, right? And we kind of need to create new air gaps in between clients and the systems you're trying to access and so on to actually protect the end users. And we kind of also, of course, have to maintain that consistent user experience now that we are spreading all of our SaaS and web apps. How do we ensure that we can have that kind of continuous consistent user experience? And also, I mean, on the flip side of that, how do we actually stay out of management hell, right? So for IT admins, how do we make sure this is actually manageable? So usually it kind of looks like this quite commonly, right? So CSIOs usually have pretty much what you see on screen here, all of the pieces of the puzzle, uh, or maybe not all of the pieces of the puzzles, but they are spread out. It's a very fragmented approach to security, and if you kind of look into what CSIOs kind of want, it's of course that perfect puzzle, right? With all the pieces, everything fits nicely and works together. And this is kind of where Citrix is evolving into as a security vendor as well, right? Because we have the different stacks when it comes to ICA protocols, streaming your apps and desktops from before. But with the addition of Workspace and the different security products, we kind of get that complete picture around the security posture that you might want to try to achieve as a customer of Citrix. And if we look into the stack of our products, we have, of course, what's called Secure Workspace Access. And from a from a security perspective, that kind of evolves or talks about or contains rather zero trust network access. So the fact that we can provide some sort of access to resources without just trusting everything and opening network ports back and forth, minimizing the use of VPNs and so on, but as well as SSO and security controls for web and SaaS, right? Because when we want to secure SSO and web apps or SaaS and web apps, that of course does not only mean that we need some sort of security context around that. We also need to provide a good user experience and maintain that single sign-on, even though we are actually providing some sort of new security layers around those apps. And of course, I talked a bit about air gaps. We need some sort of remote browsing, some sort of browser sandboxing in place as well, right? In order to protect the users, because the users might not even be aware of the malicious files they are downloading. Everyone knows how ransomware spreads today, right? It's very good phishing attempts most likely, and it's quite hard to actually detect that it might be some file you should stay away from.
And I think, Michael, this is an important point because a lot of times, especially if a user is accessing an app that is trusted, right, by their employees, so a work app, I would think that a lot of them are like, well, if I'm getting the file from there, it should be secure and it should be trusted. And that's not the case, right? Like that's not always the case. It may be a work web or SaaS application that got infected and that has a malicious file. And so the user is completely unaware of this.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of just assumed to be safe because it is within the normal corporate boundary, so to speak. But that is a dangerous assumption to make as well. And that's kind of why we need some additional capabilities to actually safeguard users, right? Because education is only going to get so far when it comes to the end users, of course. And that's, I mean, it's the same for all of us. So we kind of need those safety nets around the actual environments and the devices the users are using to make sure that we can actually protect them. And this is where SIA, Secure Internet Access, comes into the picture. It's our new offering that kind of speaks to the SASE model that Gartner invented or came up with. And that's essentially built to safeguard the user from the internet, right? So instead of giving users direct access, unfiltered, uncontrolled access to internet, we are going to proxy this through secure internet access, which means we get a lot of security capabilities, secure web gateways, web firewalling, CASBs, malware protection, DLPs, sandboxing, and so on. So that kind of adds that one missing element into the entire stack of our products that kind of to complete that picture, back to the puzzle that I showed you before, right? To complete that puzzle and add the missing piece. So if I try to break this down a bit and showcase how this works, it all, of course, starts with the Workspace and the Workspace app that we have. So this is going to be your single one-stop shop for anything enterprise, right? You want to sign in to your office, get work done every morning, right? It all starts in the Workspace. Workspace can have any IDP. That's totally up to you because we want to allow our customers to leverage identity and access management investments they might have done before. And once signed in, of course, we need access to those new apps or to those SaaS and web apps, of course, right? So we proxy those, so to speak, through the Workspace, and we can provide single sign-on. But we also get, of course, security capabilities around these SaaS and web apps. And that's also what I'm going to show in the demo. And then also we might add your physical desktops, virtual apps and desktops on top of that to provide access to resources that your users might need as well, right? That is not SaaS and web-based app only. And this, of course, is also VPN-less access to web apps. So you might have web apps running in some in Azure, some in some on-premise data center, and so on. And instead of opening firewalls and providing that attack surface, just open network ports and so on, we can provide VPN-less access through the Workspace instead, which essentially means that we are minimizing the amounts of attack surfaces we are exposing for any apps and systems, essentially. On this topic, these are just egress connections as well, and that's essentially why we are minimizing the attack vectors for hackers, of course. And I did mention we provide single sign-on to all of those different apps. It really doesn't matter if it's a SaaS app or an internal VPN-less web app or a desktop or virtual apps in desktop. It really doesn't matter. We still provide single sign-on no matter what the case is. Because of course, me being a millennial, actually, believe it or not, I do hate passwords with a passion, right? If I've signed in once, I don't want to sign in again. I should just be able to access whatever I'm trying to reach next. And this is also where SIA comes into the picture, right? So instead of just allowing users from their devices to connect directly to whatever resources on the web they're trying to access, we are going to proxy that connection through SIA, which gives us a lot of capabilities and a lot of different security controls, safeguarding the users essentially.
And Michael, at the outset, you kind of alluded to that sometimes you have to trade off user experience for security, but it looks like even though there's different flows to each app, that layer with the user there doesn't change.
Absolutely, that's correct. Yeah. So again, it comes back to this Citrix kind of long-standing experience and focus on user experience, right? That has also always been quite an important piece of the puzzle for us. So we're still trying to provide that unified, seamless user experience, and it shouldn't really matter what device you're on, right? So if it's your phone or a physical desktop, or if you're in a cafe and just borrowing a PC, that should not really matter. If you need to access work, that should work in the context you're working in, just as seamlessly as it would on your corporate deployed laptop, pretty much. So Workspace is the key to this, and that's kind of where all of this ties into to keep on providing that seamless user experience. But this essentially means, right, so there's essentially no network devices to manage because we do have the connectors that provides that VPN-less access. There's no additional public IPs you need to configure and so on, again, on the topic of attack surfaces, which of course also means there's no firewall rules you need to change. And since Workspace itself is a SaaS offering from us, it's also a global deployment. So it's quite easy to get started and super easy to actually scale this. And there's not much of infrastructure changes that you actually have to do in order to provide access to these resources. So if we actually look at some demos here to actually see what this looks like in the real world, we're going to start with secure workspace access and app protection policies, right? So this is all about taking back control, security control over SaaS and web apps, right? You might not own the data center this app or system runs in, but you still want to provide some sort of layering of security around that, right? So restrict clipboard access, restrict printing, copy paste and downloads and so on, and also provide a watermark maybe if it's a sensitive system as well, right? So if we sign into my workspace here, we are going to start a SaaS app. Now, remember, this could essentially apply to any type of app. It could be some internal web app, really doesn't matter. But in this case, I'm going to start SharePoint from Office 365 and add that security layer around it, right? So if we go into our apps, you can see that Workspace contains all of our different types of apps. It's SaaS apps, internal VPN-less web apps, it's your traditional Citrix apps as well. But when I start SharePoint from Office 365 here, you're going to see that it actually loads in a native browser. It's not a remote session to anything. It's actually a native browser. You can see that we have the watermarks here. So I am identified, the IP I am connecting from is identified. I can either copy paste. So clipboard access has been restricted here as well. But the web app itself or the SaaS system or whatever you're trying to start and have those app protection policies around still works as normal and as you kind of would expect it to. So if you kind of think the scenario of an HR system, if you have that as a SaaS service, then you might want to apply some additional security controls around that, and that would be the perfect kind of use case for that. If we move on to the next demo, which is all around sandboxing and providing new different ways of air gapping, we are going to use secure internet access and our secure browser service to automatically and dynamically sandbox different URLs based on the category, right? So maybe you want to sandbox social media, maybe you want to sandbox hacking categories and so on, right? So these categories are of course pre-filled by SIA itself. This is the categories, you don't have to create those are exist in SIA. And based on a category, whatever you've decided as an admin to be unsecure, instead of starting this session on your local client, we're going to start this in a remote browser essentially. So if there's any malicious code running on that site, trying to do some attempt at installing malware or whatever the case could be on your client, it's actually not going to be able to, because again, it's not running on your client. That's just what it looks like. So if we have a look here again, sign into my workspace. And this time around, we are not going to start an app. I'm going to start a desktop, which actually contains the SIA agent, right? Now, this doesn't have to be a desktop. This might as well be my local PC here, or my phone, or a tablet, or whatever. It really doesn't matter. It's just for demo purposes that I'm running this on this specific desktop. It's easy to kind of showcase what's going on. But once signed into Windows, I'm now going to start Chrome, right? This could be any browser because we actually intercept the web calls in order to control how this works. So in this case, I have blocked a hacking category. So any site that is of a hacking category is actually dynamically going to start in a remote browser. So I'm going to open two different sections of the website here. So the forums section and the standard website, just to show you that we carry over the URL. It's not a static configuration, it's dynamic. And once we connect, you're going to see that we now have a sandboxed browser, right? It's almost invisible to the end user as well. You only have the little Citrix icon at the top, right? Showcasing what's going on. But this web browser actually runs off the client. So that means I am essentially protected from any malicious things that might be going on. And here I have Amazon as well, because I have also blocked the shopping category. And now I'm trying to access gift cards correctly. It's not only Amazon.com. Again, just showcasing that the fact that this is actually dynamic. So it takes me into the gift cards section of Amazon.com. So that kind of gives you as IT admins the capabilities to actually not, you don't have to know beforehand all of the sites, all of the kind of things you have to forbid and kind of provide security controls around. It actually gives you the capability to configure that based on the categories of sites instead, right? So phishing would be, of course, a very good kind of scenario here. Someone gets an email with a fishy link in, but since that's hosted under the category of unknown or suspicious sites, that phishing link would not open natively on my client. That would open in this sandboxed browser, and thus kind of securing me from anything going wrong. And that was essentially Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was going to say that demo was really cool because they were actually launching a local Chrome, right? Like they didn't need to launch a containerized full browser.
Exactly,
and by looking on local Chrome and going to these sites, it was like seamless to the end user, which I think is very powerful because you're not teaching them to do something different. You're not telling them, hey, you need to go to a different browser to do this. It just happens in the back end.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. Again, tying back to that piece of user experience we discussed earlier, it's quite an important piece, of course.